What's your favorite genre of reading? What do you usually read? Ever wondered how different genres of books create the element of curiosity, fear, anxiety, or even the excitement we say? Going through all the novels, short stories, be it a book of fantasy, what actually mattered is how the book creates a wave between the readers. So today, here, we're going to discuss how once a detective novel was written and the detective novel took over the market later. Let's get started. This first detective novel, written in the year 1841. Have you heard about the first detective novel or stories written in the year 1841? No worries. This is why we're here to help you, and of course, listen carefully so that you won't feel left behind. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, an eccentric story written by a literal genius and excellent theorist, Edgar Allan Poe. This was published by the Graham's magazine in the year 1841. This story caught the identity as the first modern detective story. As for the author himself, it was one of his tales of ratiocination. For all the readers, this story aroused a wave into the popular culture and acceptance. What more can you expect from the world's first ever detective novel? Going deep into the story and the author, the Poe boy was the infamous author of this story. He was born in Boston in 1809. Eventually met with his afterlife under a very mysterious circumstance in Baltimore in 1849. So, for the tremendous amount of readers, it was nothing but a shock that the extraordinary man left the world, and God knows what actually happened. The fact is that he was known better as a literary critic than a craftsman during his lifetime in the US, while he was known for his fiction in Europe. After death, he started to grow popular for his fictional works. This included not just detective stories, but also for sci-fi and horror. For his The Murders in the Rue Morgue, set at the peak of his list along with other works such as The Raven. Its theme was the exercise of ingenuity in detecting a murderer. He added, Poe wrote to his friend Dr. Joseph Snodgrass, just to make sure how well one solves a murder case without implying much of the details. It's all about how well all the facts are put together and read delightfully to the reach of a conclusion. And of course, this conclusion includes the accused, or we say, the killer, with regards to a detective story. Thus, to solve a crime, the power of language is to be unlocked, with the unnamed association of mind. This includes the research and the published accounts, face-to-face interviews with perfect sources, and finally, the application of the brain. So, that's how it's done. This analysis extended to how the story ended, up with the perfect timeline of facts which made the readers get engaged into the story and get glued to it. The methods like these were even encouraged by him, with his extensive interest in cryptography, notably outlined in a few words of secret writing published by Graham's magazine 3 months after Rue Morgue. As for the story, Dupin, he was not a professional detective, it seemed, but still he decided to investigate the murders in the Rue Morgue. He was thorough on what he wanted and how he had to achieve it. For example, he had this deep desire to prove the falsely accused as innocent. G had zero interest in finance. To prove this, he even rejected a monetary reward from the owner of the orangutan. Thus, this whole story goes into how Dupin ends solving the crime and the path he chooses. Poe had this idea of writing about a detective novel for a long time. It was mostly because of the time when crime was in front due to urban development. London, being the busy city it is, installed their first efficient professional police force, and this was the best development ever. Like already mentioned, he had always made sure to include a theme of urban crimes in almost all his works. This was how The Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Man of the Crowd had the theme. And The Man of the Crowd is most likely to be his inspiration from Philadelphia. This entire tale has a metaphor for the battle of brains versus brawn. The other key notables, such as the physical strength shown as the orangutan, etc., the act of standing for violence. On the scene of the orangutan is a murderer, what the story comes along with it. The part where the analysis brain chose the right path, and thus Poe depicted how well he went with the theme. The story also has Poe's well-addressed theme of death, and that too of a beautiful woman. And he called this one as the most poetical topic in the world. Here's to the part where and how Poe ended up in writing a detective story. what actually inspired him to do his writings on this genre, how well he had his research being done to get the story in the exact way he wanted it to be. To begin with, the word detective was or didn't even exist at the time when Poe wrote The Murders in the Rue Morgue. Yeah, the same feeling here as well. So, people, which was the first novel or a story that you have read? How long did it take for you to complete the same? Let us know in the comments below. And where were we? Oh, yeah. So, about the word detective. Like I already mentioned, didn't exist at the time Poe wrote the story. Even though there were many similar stories relating to problem solving and all, don't know how, but the word detective was not that used. Many a time, the story written by E.T.A. Hoffmann, Das Fräulein von Scudery in the year 1819 was treated as the first detective story from its storyline, where Mel, de Scudery, a kind of innocent man from the 19th century, solving and proving the innocence of the favorite suspect of the police. Here, the police believe the suspect to be the killer of a jeweler. Other than this story, we have Voltaire's Sadiq, 1748, having the same effect of a main character, themselves taken from The Three Princes of Serendip, an Italian rendition of Amir Khusro's Hasht Bahisht. As for Poe, it was kind of guessed that he might be expanding his dimensions on the works including the essays on Mayazel's Chess Player and the comedic Three Sundays in a Week. For his appreciators, it was more like accepted, with how he had picked up the perfect biological knowledge on his collaboration with Thomas Wyatt looking, his narrative, with the subject of evolution, especially the studies done by Cuvier, likely to be also influenced by the studies conducted by Lord Monboddo, for his level of concentration. Although Poe has been more literary than scientific, says the debaters around. And the funny part is that Poe would even get inspired from his crowd to an orangutan on display at the Masonic Hall in Philadelphia in July 1839. For indeed, the story has the main character, whose name was inspired from the Dupin character from the series of stories that were first published in Burton's Gentleman's Magazine in 1828 called Unpublished Passages in the Life of Vidocq, the French Minister of Police. So, you this ended here. Nope. No, to be exact. It could be for any reason on how Poe actually planned with the story and how the whole scenario sets with his inspiration and what he expected. Not just that he also managed to include our superhero aesthetics and powers, for example, a Superman or say a Batman who are actually the secret agents. You may even imagine Lucifer Morningstar from Lucifer, the Netflix series. In short, on this whole ride of the story, Poe did manage to have not just Batman but also Sherlock Holmes. Maybe he might have seen Dupin in them. Calling out all good names on how perfect this story was and to praise how everyone supported him. The same rules were to be followed by anyone. This created a strong hero. But even when all these Dupin stories have a heart in Poe's and everyone's favorites, The Murders in the Rue Morgues, spelling out on that series, which hit the mainstream without any further delay. For most of you, may not find this emulates. Let us know what are your thoughts on this book, shall we?